10,000 years ago, the world stood at a turning point, an era of dramatic change, incredible innovation, and the first sparks of what we now call civilization. The Ice Age had just ended, the Earth was warming, glaciers were melting, and humans, Homo sapiens, had already spread to nearly every corner of the globe. But this wasn't just a time of survival, it was a time of transformation. In this period, humans were no longer simply adapting to nature, they were beginning to shape it. Agriculture was taking root in fertile lands. Art and symbolism were flourishing in caves and on rock faces, and early technologies were evolving fast, from microlithic tools to complex hunting strategies. Communities were forming, spiritual ideas were taking shape, and the human story was entering a powerful new phase. It's a time that bridges the world of wild hunters and the world of settled farmers, a moment where the ancient and the modern meet. In today's video, we're going to travel back to this incredible age and explore how people lived, what they believed, and how they laid the groundwork for the civilizations to come. So let's dive into the world of 10,000 years ago, a time when humanity was just beginning to find its place. Around 12,000 years ago, Earth stood at the threshold of a major climatic shift, a transition from the harsh, frozen grip of the last ice age into a warmer, more hospitable interglacial period known as the Holocene. This moment marked the beginning of an entirely new chapter for both the planet and humankind. For nearly 100,000 years, massive glaciers had dominated much of the northern hemisphere, locking in water, reshaping landscapes, and forcing human populations into smaller, scattered refugees across Africa, Asia, and Europe. But around 11,700 years ago, as the Earth's orbit subtly shifted and solar radiation increased, a result of what's known as the Milankovitch cycles, the glaciers began to rapidly retreat. Temperatures rose, sea levels surged, and ecosystems transformed with astonishing speed. In just a few centuries, vast expanses of tundra and ice gave way to forests, rivers swelled, lakes formed, and regions once uninhabitable burst into life. These environmental changes triggered massive migrations as animals and humans alike followed the shifting boundaries of livable terrain. For human populations, this wasn't just a physical change, it was a cognitive and cultural awakening. As landscapes opened up, food sources diversified. Instead of relying solely on the big game hunting of mammoths, woolly rhinos, or reindeer, early humans began exploiting smaller, more varied animals and a broad spectrum of plant life. This dietary shift, referred to by archaeologists as the Broad Spectrum Revolution, signaled the emergence of the Mesolithic way of life, a phase between the Paleolithic and the Neolithic. Humans adapted by creating more specialized tools, microliths, tiny stone blades, fishing, spears, bone harpoons, and digging sticks crafted from antlers. These weren't just survival tools, they were evidence of increasingly sophisticated thinking and planning. With greater food security and less dependence on nomadic big-game hunting, humans began to settle for longer periods in one place. In Europe, this shift was visible in the rise of cultures like the Maglemosian in Doggerland, a landmass that once connected modern-day Britain to mainland Europe. This now submerged landscape was a lush region of lakes, rivers, and wetlands, and here, people hunted deer and aurochs, fished with finely carved tools, and possibly built seasonal shelters or even semi-permanent dwellings. Similar scenes unfolded across the world in the Near East, particularly the Levant and Anatolia, where the Natufian culture laid the foundation for agriculture. In North Africa, where toolkits diversified in response to changing conditions, and in Siberia and the Arctic, where coastal and riverine resources became essential. As human populations expanded into these newly accessible environments, they carried with them not only tools, but ideas. Rock art, symbolism, and the earliest forms of spiritual or religious expression began to flourish. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, dated to just over 11,000 years ago, reveal the astonishing complexity of early belief systems. Here, massive stone pillars carved with animals and abstract forms were arranged into circular temples, likely used for ritual gatherings long before farming communities took hold. Such sites challenge the assumption that large-scale construction came only after agriculture. Instead, they suggest that spiritual or social needs may have driven humans to organize and settle even before crops were planted. As climate stabilized and the planet warmed, sea levels continued to rise. In some places, such as Southeast Asia or the North Sea Basin, entire regions were gradually swallowed by the ocean. Doggerland, once teeming with life, began to vanish beneath the waves, pushing its inhabitants further inland or toward higher ground. This forced migration didn't stop progress. It likely accelerated it, encouraging the exchange of ideas, technologies, and even genes between different groups. Genetic studies from this era show that many of the populations in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia were already interconnected through complex webs of ancestry and interbreeding. Homo sapiens had not only survived the Ice Age, they had emerged from it stronger, more adaptable, and more interconnected than ever before. At the same time, many of the large megafauna that had dominated Ice Age ecosystems began to disappear. Climate change undoubtedly played a role in these extinctions, but so did human hunting, especially as our ancestors developed more effective tools and cooperative strategies. With mammoths, giant sloths, and woolly rhinos vanishing, ecosystems restructured themselves, and humans had to rethink how they fit into this new balance. The disappearance of these animals didn't mark the end of human innovation. It spurred it forward. People began cultivating wild grains, domesticating animals, and experimenting with new ways to live off the land. By 10,000 years ago, the world was fundamentally different from the one that had existed even a few centuries prior. Forests now stretched across Europe, savannas expanded in Africa, and deserts began to form in areas where rainfall had once been abundant. Yet, in nearly every region of the world, humans found a way not only to survive, but to thrive. They adapted, innovated, and carried the flame of progress forward. The Ice Age had ended, but humanity's true journey was only just beginning. By the time the Ice Age had fully receded and humanity settled into the Holocene's more stable climate, early human societies were undergoing a quiet revolution, one not marked by sudden inventions or dramatic battles, but by slow, foundational shifts in how we lived, thought, and interacted with the natural world. Across Europe, Asia, and beyond, a mosaic of distinct yet interconnected cultures began to emerge, each adapting to their specific environments, while also laying down the groundwork for the civilizations that would follow in later millennia. In the now submerged region known as Doggerland, nestled between present-day Britain and mainland Europe, the Maglemosian people thrived in a watery-rich landscape of wetlands, rivers, and dense forests. These Mesolithic hunter-gatherers created sophisticated fishing gear, built dugout canoes, and developed composite tools, tiny stone microliths set into wooden shafts that allowed them to hunt deer, boar, and birds with astonishing efficiency. Evidence suggests they may have even constructed semi-permanent dwellings near lake shores and rivers, pointing toward an early inclination for settlement. To the east, in the forests and plains of what is now Poland and the southern Baltic, the people of the Suwarowo and Svederian cultures refined their pressure-flaking techniques to produce long, elegant stone blades, often attached to bone and antler shafts to create deadly hunting weapons. These tools weren't just practical, they were expertly crafted, hinting at a cultural appreciation for skill, precision, and possibly even aesthetics. Similar technologies were independently developing as far away as Mongolia and northern China, showing how ideas were spreading across continents, either through migration, interaction, or simple parallel innovation. But while tools became more efficient, it was symbolic behavior, art, ritual, and belief that signaled the deepest transformation. In the Iberian Peninsula, the Azilian culture carried forward the symbolic traditions of the Upper Paleolithic with a unique flair. These people painted vivid, naturalistic images in caves and on stone, archers in motion, hunting scenes, geometric forms, and even what appeared to be confrontations between human groups. One particular cave painting shows a group of archers surrounding and seemingly attacking another trio, possibly the earliest artistic depiction of organized human conflict. Whether this was a literal memory of battle or a symbolic tale, it reflects an increasingly complex social world. Spirituality, too, was becoming more elaborate. In the Ural Mountains, the Shigir idol, a wooden statue carved over 9,000 years ago from a massive larch tree, stood over 5 meters tall, its surface covered in stylized human faces and mysterious zigzag patterns. It is one of the oldest known wooden sculptures in the world, possibly representing deities, spirits, or ancestral guardians. Its craftsmanship and symbolic depth indicate a rich spiritual life and a worldview that extended far beyond simple survival. Moving further north, the first peoples to colonize Scandinavia, the pioneers of the Kamsa and Fosna cultures, pushed into previously frozen landscapes with surprising speed, possibly by boat along coastal routes. Despite the cold and isolation, they left behind intricate carvings on stone, including scenes of hunting marine animals, dancing figures, and what may be representations of ritual practices. These early Arctic settlers demonstrate the incredible adaptability of early humans, not just in surviving extreme conditions, but in thriving, innovating, and expressing complex thoughts in their art and daily lives. Meanwhile, in southeastern Europe, cultures like the Epigravidians continued traditions that dated back tens of thousands of years. In the caves of modern-day Bulgaria and Italy, painted figures, both human and animal, dance across walls, some with arrows lodged in their sides, others seemingly engaged in ceremonial acts. These scenes blur the lines between daily life, mythology, and spirituality. Along the Mediterranean coastlines, groups were becoming increasingly skilled in exploiting marine resources. Evidence suggests that they were not only fishing with bone hooks and nets, but also venturing into deeper waters, possibly with the help of early boats. Fish like grouper and tuna, which are difficult to catch from shore, appear in middens, ancient trash heaps, revealing the growing sophistication of human subsistence strategies. And in the Levant, something revolutionary was taking shape. The Natufian culture, centered in the area of modern-day Israel, Jordan, and Syria, had begun constructing permanent stone dwellings, burying their dead with care, and perhaps most critically, harvesting and storing wild grains. Though they hadn't yet domesticated plants, their knowledge of seasonal patterns and crop behavior laid the foundation for the agricultural revolution soon to come. The shift from foraging to farming wouldn't be sudden, nor universal, but in regions like the Fertile Crescent, the groundwork was clearly being laid. All across Eurasia, human groups were engaging in more structured ways of living. Seasonal settlements near water sources, increased social cooperation for large hunts, and possibly even the beginnings of territoriality. Yet this period wasn't just about economic or technological change. It was about identity. Genetic studies reveal that many of the people in Europe at this time belonged to a group known as Western hunter-gatherers, who had dark skin, blue eyes, and dark hair, quite different from modern Europeans. To the east, Eastern hunter-gatherers, lighter-skinned with darker eyes, inhabited the forests and steppes of Siberia and Eastern Europe. The mixing of these populations would eventually give rise to the Yamnaya culture, precursors to the Indo-Europeans, but in this Mesolithic window, genetic diversity was high and constantly in motion. Human movement was not simply the result of necessity, it was exploration, curiosity, and the search for better life. Whether crossing icy rivers in Scandinavia, carving idols in the Urals, or planting the seeds of agriculture in the Levant, humanity was preparing for something far greater than mere survival. This was the beginning of intentional living, of communities that thought ahead, honored their dead, imagined the divine, and sought to understand the world around them. The journey to civilization had not yet arrived, but its path was now clearly visible in every carved stone, every buried ancestor, every seasonal camp turned village. These early cultures, spread across a vast and changing world, were not primitive. They were pioneers of the human spirit, lighting the torch that would one day lead to cities, empires, and written history. By around 10,000 years ago, humanity stood on the cusp of its greatest transformation yet, the shift from nomadic hunter-gatherers to settled, food-producing societies. This wasn't a single invention or sudden breakthrough, but a long, uneven process that unfolded over centuries, beginning quietly in a few fertile corners of the world and eventually changing the entire human experience. At the heart of this transformation was agriculture, one of the most significant developments in our species' history. In regions such as the Fertile Crescent, which stretches across parts of modern-day Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and Iran, communities that had already begun harvesting wild grains like wheat and barley took the next bold step. They began cultivating them deliberately. Through observation, experimentation, and shared knowledge, they selected seeds from the most fruitful plants, sowed them near their homes, and reaped the benefits months later. Alongside this, the domestication of animals such as goats, sheep, and later cattle gave early humans reliable sources of meat, milk, hides, and even companionship. This was the Neolithic Revolution, the birth of agriculture, and it changed everything. No longer bound to follow migrating herds or seasonal fruits, people could now stay in one place, store food, and plan for the future. Villages began to appear, like the famous site of Çatalhöyük in central Anatolia, one of the oldest known towns in the world. Here, hundreds of closely packed mud brick houses formed a dense, thriving community. People buried their dead beneath their homes, painted elaborate murals of animals and gods on their walls, and even constructed shrines filled with bull skulls, suggesting a rich spiritual and communal life. Life was still hard. Illness, famine, and conflict were never far, but the very concept of home was changing. Elsewhere, in the highlands of modern-day Iran and the valleys of the Levant, similar patterns emerged. Small groups planting grains, tending herds, and slowly building social structures that would lay the foundation for future cities. Agriculture didn't just provide food, it freed up time. And with that time, people turned to creativity, belief, and innovation. Pottery became widespread during this era, offering not just storage but also a new canvas for artistic expression. Some of the earliest ceramic designs show intricate geometric patterns, suggesting that even in these humble items, beauty and symbolism were important. Tools also evolved rapidly. Sickles for harvesting crops, grinding stones for processing grain, and clay ovens for baking bread all appear in the archaeological record. With more food came population growth, and with more people came the need for cooperation, rules, and possibly the earliest forms of governance. It's likely that village elders or respected hunters took on leadership roles, making decisions for the good of the group, managing disputes, and perhaps even overseeing early rituals and ceremonies. Religion, too, was becoming more structured. At places like Göbekli Tepe, even before full agriculture had taken hold, massive stone pillars carved with animals and abstract symbols were erected in circular formations. These were not living spaces, they were sacred spaces built by hunter-gatherers and possibly used for ritual feasting, ancestor worship, or seasonal ceremonies. The effort required to build such monuments, carving, transporting, and erecting multi-ton stones would have demanded organized labor and a shared belief system strong enough to unite people in a common cause. It suggests that belief, not just survival, may have been a driving force behind early human cooperation. And while Göbekli Tepe is the most famous, it wasn't alone. Dozens of similar but smaller sites have been found across the Near East, pointing to a wide network of early ritual centers that predated writing, metal, or even permanent towns. Outside of the Fertile Crescent, agricultural developments were emerging independently. In China, people were beginning to domesticate millet along the Yellow River and rice in the Yangtze Basin. In Mesoamerica, the ancestors of the Olmecs were slowly beginning to experiment with squash, beans, and a grass called teosinte, the ancestor of maize. In the New Guinea highlands, taro and yam cultivation was beginning, while in parts of Africa, local grains like sorghum and African rice were being tended. These early farming experiments were not coordinated. They arose separately, shaped by local environments, plants, and cultural needs, but they all pointed in the same direction. A new way of life rooted in place and season. With agriculture also came a different relationship with the land, where hunter-gatherers moved with the rhythms of the environment. Early farmers began to control and alter it, clearing forests, diverting water, creating fields, and protecting their crops. This led to profound environmental changes, some of which we are still dealing with today. Soil depletion, deforestation, and the rise of zoonotic diseases, those that jump from animals to humans, can all trace their origins to these early transitions. Yet despite these challenges, agriculture allowed humans to begin building complexity. Trade networks began to grow, as surplus goods like obsidian, salt, or grain were exchanged across regions. Specialized roles emerged. Some people farmed, others crafted tools, while others led ceremonies or interpreted the skies. Slowly, the foundations of social hierarchy began to take shape, not always based on force, but on knowledge, charisma, or spiritual authority. Art continued to flourish. In every corner of the world, people carved, painted, and shaped their world with creativity. Clay figurines of women, possibly fertility symbols, appear across early Neolithic sites. Rock art continued to be made, showing not just animals but complex scenes, battles, dances, and what may be myths or historical memories. These images are windows into the minds of our ancestors, showing that even as their daily lives became more settled, their imaginations remained wild and free. By the end of this period, roughly 8,000 years ago, the world had changed beyond recognition. Humanity had gone from scattered bands of foragers to building villages, growing food, developing rituals, and organizing into social groups. Not all regions moved at the same pace, and many hunter-gatherer societies thrived alongside farming ones for thousands of years. But the direction was set. The seeds, literal and cultural, of civilization had been planted. What would follow in the coming millennia, cities, empires, writing, and war, would all grow from the choices made during this remarkable time. The world of 10,000 years ago was not a primitive wilderness. It was a vibrant, dynamic landscape filled with ingenuity, cooperation, and vision. It was the world where humans stopped merely surviving and began shaping the future.